Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for logging in. We're going to be speaking with Tufts University today. For those of you who have logged in, if you could just type in yes into the chat box that you can hear me loud and clear. Can you guys hear me?
And to me as well while we're while we're checking the tech.
Mm, Shanza, if you're around, can you type in yes if you can hear me? That'd be great. Okay, well, I know you can hear me, Megan. I can hear you. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. Thank you so much, everybody, for logging in today. My name is Rafia Sufi, and I am an Education USA advisor. I am based in the Lahore, Pakistan office. Um, and we'll be talking to Megan McHale today of Tufts University. She is the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions, and she's going to be talking to you about lots of things. And as the presentation says, who gets in and why. So Megan, if you could just take over, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad some of you are able to join us. I hope you're able to hear me. And if you have questions, I'll probably try to hang on to them until the end, but feel free to enter them into the chat feature and I'll see them pop up on the side. So I'm hoping all of you can sort of hear and see us. If not, thank goodness we're recording it. Um, so again, my name is Megan McHale. I'm here from Tufts University. I'm actually at Tufts University. It's a nice fall day up outside of Boston. And I'm happy to field any questions you have about Tufts. We're sort of a medium-sized, research-intensive, liberal arts feeling interdisciplinary university near Boston. But the crux of what I want to talk to you about today is more about highly selective admissions in general. Each year, Tufts receives significantly more qualified applicants than we're able to admit. And each year, we whittle that down to a group of about 17%. And the process that we use to do that is pretty similar in a lot of ways to the way that other highly selective schools go about that process. So really anywhere you're looking in the US that's admitting, I'd argue, a third or fewer of their applicants, so sort of 35% or fewer, are all sort of having somewhat similar conversations at even different degrees of selectivity. And I think this presentation will give you some insight into how that works really at any highly selective US institution with some variability, but we'll get into that. So this presentation is actually a portion of a much longer presentation that involves a case study, but I'm just going to give you guys sort of the intro piece. And the title is Who Gets In and Why? How do I, let's see. Oh, that's how I transition slides. There we go. Um, so a big reason we try to have this conversation with students, and we try to have it with families and parents as well, is that there tends to be a lot of anxiety and a lot of confusion around how American colleges, particularly highly selective colleges, particularly the schools that are working with more than just sort of SAT cutoffs, grade cutoffs, the kinds of very objective systems that you're used to in your higher education system. There's a certain mystique about what we do. This is a quote from Inside Higher Ed, which is a publication that deals with college admissions. It says, the image of college admissions officers, meaning me, people like me, as gatekeepers is a powerful one. And part of that mystique is that what they do goes on behind closed doors. So there oftentimes feels like there's a lot of stress and a lot of confusion that revolves around this process. And I think the ethos in the Tufts office is, why stress you out more than you are already stressed? You know, let's tell you how we do our work. It's complicated. It's not cut and dry. There's a lot of nuance to it. But I think the process at Tufts and other highly selective schools is thoughtful and one that we don't need to be sort of secretive about. So we want to tell you, and I want to tell you a bit about how it works. So the question is, what counts and why does it count? And I think what we're trying to do in any highly selective process is, broadly speaking, assess merit, if you want to sort of give it one big definition. And we're looking at merit in many categories, many shapes and forms. But these are sort of the four categories that you can break merit down into. So there's academic achievement, which is going to be the first thing that comes to mind for pretty much everyone. Extracurricular engagement. which has a lot to do with the way we run universities in the United States. I'll dig into that a bit more, but the upshot is that these things matter because when you come to school in the US, we don't want you to come here, go to class, study, go home, and have that be the end of your day. The expectation is that the learning experience is happening in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And in order to see that a student is going to be capable of contributing in that way, we assess what you've done outside of the classroom in the last 4 years. So we're looking at extracurricular engagement, personal qualities. This is by far the least quantifiable and most nebulous piece of this process. So we'll give this its time in the sun. And then the last one, which is sort of the much talked about, very not particularly well understood facet of this, is something called institutional priorities, and we'll sort of get to that at the end. So what I want to do is sort of break down each of these forms of merit for you and give you a sense of what they look like, how we find evidence of them, how we talk about them in our process. So the first one is always going to be academic achievement. First and foremost, we are institutions of higher education. You are coming to us to get your bachelor's degree, maybe go on to a master's degree, to a PhD. So the academics are the first step in any review process at any school in the US. Some schools in the US that are not as selective will look at the academics and have that be sort of sufficient. If you, at some not selective institutions, have X SAT score and Y GPA, you are in. And then that's the end of the conversation. For us, it goes much beyond that, but the academics are necessary. You know, Tufts and other highly selective schools are that way because we are academically rigorous institutions. We are expecting a lot out of our students in the classroom, and they need to be well prepared in order to handle the rigors of 4 years on our campus. So when we're looking at academic criteria, there's a couple places we're going to find the information about whether or not you're ready. Curriculum is going to be first and foremost. And curriculum means sort of to the extent that you have choice in the matter. Did you opt to take the most challenging classes available to you? So this varies system to system. If some of you are on the national system, your options are relatively limited. If some of you are on the IB system, you have slightly more options, but still, in fairness, not a ton of choices. If anyone's in an American school, maybe you have the option of doing AP classes. Everyone is judged in the context of, actually, and we'll wait and talk about context in a second. But the curriculum is essentially the classes that you took. The grades you received, and this is important to point out because on any system that is very exam focused, where you're taking an exam at multiple points within your secondary education, we're looking at those and we're looking at the day-to-day work. So we need official grades from any national testing service. If you sat, IGCSEs or whatever it might be, O levels at any point, we'll look for those grades. But we're also looking at your periodic assessments in school. This is going to vary place to place on what a school provides and what they make available to you and what they track. But we like to see something because it's very possible that you could have a student who crams for, the big national exam, but in doing so has not gone to school, has not contributed to school, has not submitted their homework, whatever it might be. And at US institutions, that's not going to work. We want students who are going to come and contribute every single day. So we're looking at both of those pieces. Transcript trends can be something we take a look at. So not every student has been top of their class for all 4 years. That doesn't mean that a student who wasn't top of their class all 4 years isn't eligible for highly selective schools. Upward trends are always taken into account in a positive way. If you're someone who took a little time to get situated, to find your academic footing, that's totally fine. We'll rely more heavily on your most recent grades to determine your readiness for campus. Trends down are not particularly helpful, if we want to be totally honest about it. But we'll look to see sort of what your trajectory was. If there are strengths and weaknesses, if you're someone who's going to go into engineering, your math science grades have always been very high, but maybe your English grades were not as strong. That's okay. That's something we'll take into account. Class rank is something we'll look at if it's made available to us, and then the much dreaded standardized testing, but we'll talk more about that in a second. So it's important to note that we're looking at your academics in context, that not all academics are sort of created equally. Whoop, sorry, back one. That not all academics are created equally. And we're looking at the evaluation of your academic record within the background of where you're coming from. So we are not comparing a student in a national school in Pakistan to a student in an IB school in Singapore, to a student in a private school in Boston, to a student in a public school in France. You're just not the same. So it's our job as readers to understand where our applicants are coming from, to understand the nuances of the system, and to make sense of that in context. So within that realm, we're looking at the type of school you attend. We're looking at the percentage of graduates who enrolled at four-year colleges. We're looking at the curriculum. I talked about that just a second ago, that we're expecting you to take advantage of what's available to you, but that's all we can expect. If you're someone who doesn't go to a school with an IB program, we can't expect you to do the IB. We're happy to see you do well in whatever was offered to you and that we know that you were challenging yourself. Looking at the socioeconomic makeup of the community, the socioeconomic status of the family, as well as the English language exposure. And I would add to this as well as the exposure to the American education system. I think there is a lot in this process that is American-centric. It is the nature of this process. It is the nature of the beast. But we have that in the back of our mind when we're working with a student who maybe goes to, I don't know, Karachi Grammar School, whose parents were educated outside the U.S., if they went to university at all, who's never lived in the U.S., who doesn't go to an American school, doesn't have access to that kind of information. I think where we see this really primarily is oftentimes going to be in the testing. So there's a lot of anxiety that revolves around SAT scores, but I'll give you an example. So if we have a student who, let's say they're in Singapore, and they take the SAT. They were raised in a household where the primary language was, let's say they're native Chinese, so their primary language at home is Chinese. They've gone to school in English their entire life. They definitely speak English, but when they're at the dinner table, they speak Chinese. When they're talking to their friends, they speak Chinese. When they go to a restaurant, they speak Chinese. When they're working with a vendor on the street, they speak Chinese. So while they very much do speak Chinese, or very much do speak English, Chinese is the native language. So let's say that student takes the SAT and gets a 650 on the critical reading section of the SAT. So then we switch gears and we have a student in Boston who was raised by American parents, who went to American universities, who each attended four-year colleges. This is a student who speaks English at home, speaks English at school, speaks English on the street, has always been educated with the goal of taking the SAT and going on to a U.S. college. Let's say that student takes the SAT and gets a 650 on the critical reading section of that exam. Numerically, those scores are identical. But in the way we perceive them, which one of them did better? The kid from Singapore has a better score, even though quantifiably it is exactly the same as the other student. So that's an example of how we view you in context, that we're looking at your background to interpret your academics, to interpret your scores, to interpret your ability to do the work on campus. And bare minimum, that's what we have to attest to, that you could come to our campus, attend classes for 4 years, pass your classes, and graduate on time. And we'll get into the numbers of this, but most of the students who apply to highly selective schools are in that boat. But that's a sense about what we're looking for in the academics. Extracurricular engagement is very important as well. We're looking at your interests and areas of involvement outside the classroom, if you're well-rounded or if you're a specialist, if you've been exploring different opportunities or if you have long-term commitments, if you're a leader or member. And in these different pieces, in those sort of last couple bullet points, I want to point out that one of those things is not better than the other. A leader is not necessarily better than a member when we're thinking about a student and who we're bringing to campus. If we only admitted students who were leaders, nothing would get done on campus. It would be chaos. We need some students who are going to be good, diligent members of clubs who are going to help get the work done rather than just giving the orders. So the same thing is true for well-rounded or specialist. You know, I think sometimes there's this perception on both ends that one is better than the other, that to get into U.S. colleges, you have to play a sport and do an academic extracurricular and do debate and do a musical instrument and do this. And some other people seem to believe that, you know, to get into a highly selective school, you have to be Pakistan's finest violinist, you know, or you'll never get in anywhere. Neither of those are true. I think what matters to us and what matters to highly selective admissions sort of committees is that we see students who took advantage of opportunities to do more than just their homework. And for many of you, this is going to be a challenging task. For many of you, you're in schools where that's not the expectation, where there isn't a ton of opportunities available. And we get that. A student at a public school in Pakistan is not going to be handed exactly the same opportunities at 12 varsity sports and 15 debate groups and 10 performing groups and, that a student in New Jersey might have access to. So we don't expect you to sort of dream up opportunities that aren't placed before you, but we do expect that you've taken advantage of things. Again, as we think about building a campus community where everyone's contributing in a really thoughtful way, we need to know that you're not just going to go to class. If we're going to be picky about who we bring to campus, we want to bring students who are going to have an impact. So if we're looking at you over the last 4 years, did you fill the time available to you, not fill it, but utilize the time available to you in a thoughtful way? Were you given opportunities and you took advantage of them? And tell us everything you do. Know that, again, there aren't value judgments that one of these activities is better than the other. If you're someone who hasn't been able to do Model UN and internships because you have a grandparent who lives in the home and a little sibling, and both of your parents work. So when your day is over, you have to return from school, pick your little sister up from school, stop at the grocery store, pick up things for dinner, go home, meet with your grandmother, help prepare dinner, help your little sister with her homework. As much as that's not Model UN, that is a thoughtful use of your time. So that is something worth mentioning on an application. Literally anything you do with your time is worth telling me about. If it's something that's important to you and if it's something that enhances the way you live your life. Because it tells me something about you that you're a committed family member who's really going to put in the time to help take out the trash and get grandma to her doctor's appointment or whatever it might be. So don't hesitate to list those items. So really we're looking to see that you've taken advantage of what's available to you and gotten engaged, and that will hint towards what you might do when you get to our campus. Spinning wheel. The next category is personal qualities. There was, in not the international team in our office, some debate when we first saw this presentation about what that boy is holding, and we all had to inform him that that is a cricket bat and that it is not just an oversized baseball bat. So personal qualities is really nebulous, but we're asking a big question about essentially what is this person going to add to our campus community? What's their personality? What are they passionate about? What's their personal or political philosophy? What kind of background do they come from? How is that going to contribute to conversations on campus? This is really sort of one of the most important pieces, and I would argue for Tufts, sometimes after academics, one of the most important piece of our review process. Who are you as a person? And this is different than you're going to encounter in, let's say, the UCAS system, if you're applying to British schools. When you are providing sort of the more personal side of you, you're going to write an essay for them that is a statement of purpose. Why do you want this education? What are you using this education for? It's very British in many ways. In the US, we're much more concerned with sort of the authentic personality and ideas and voice, really, of students who are coming to our campus. When it is 1 a.m. on a Wednesday night and a group of Tufts freshmen are sitting in the hall of their floor doing their homework, ordering pizza, and discussing the meaning of life, what are you contributing to that conversation? How are you going to make that interaction more interesting for your peers? And sometimes you have big pieces of your background that contribute to this. By virtue of coming from Pakistan, you're going to contribute something different than someone coming from Boston, someone coming from the UK, someone coming from India. And it's important to bring those voices to campus. But beyond just your sheer demographics, what wakes you up in the morning? What drives you? What do you see on Twitter that makes you want to scream? What do you see in the news that makes you upset? What do you hear about through the grapevine that makes you smile so hard your face hurts? Those are the pieces of your personality and the glimpses of you that we want to get to know. And we're finding that in your essays, in your extracurriculars, your recommendations, and an interview if one's available. Three of these I'm going to sort of blow past, and we'll dig more into the essays. Interviews are optional for us. They're a good opportunity if you can find a school that offers them and you're able to get matched up in person or on Skype. I'd recommend interviewing as long as you feel comfortable sitting with a stranger and talking about yourself for half an hour. If that is an interaction that is truly uncomfortable for you, I would say if they're optional, don't bother, because it just won't go well. You'll just be too nervous. But I think if you can handle it, you sort of might as well. Recommendations are not something you can control at this point, but we're going to pay attention to what your teachers say about you. So if any of you are listening and you are still, 2 years away from applying, a year away from applying, think about the fact that we're going to rely on your teachers and a counselor or someone in your school who's an administrative staff member to tell us about who you are, and that getting to know those people and showing them your personality will be important down the road. And then extracurricular activities appear here as well. So the extracurricular activities matter, once, so that we know you're using your time thoughtfully, and we'll do so on our campus as well. They matter again in that they reflect something about your personality. The student who is a three-sport sort of sportsman who plays cricket and golf and table tennis is different than someone who is in 7 community service groups. One is not better than the other. There is not a value judgment on which of those is better, but they tell me something about your personality, that those were the activities that you chose to take advantage of. The student who does scientific research is different than the student who does art, and is different than the student who does both. Again, one is not better than the other, but we'll use that to sort of read into who you are and what you're all about. But the essays at this point, if any of you are applying this year, the essays are the one piece that you actually have a lot of control over, and that I would highly recommend you put some time and thought into. So the supplement I'll get to in a second. We are a Common App school. Most of the highly selective schools in the US, minus MIT and Georgetown, do their own apps, but pretty much everyone else is on the Common App. Most of us will have you answered the question on the Common App. It's a long form essay. If you're applying this year, hopefully you've taken a crack at it already. We'll get as much information out of that as we can. But I think one of the bigger things that you should focus on, and something that oftentimes goes underappreciated, is the writing supplement, is the set of questions that we ask you specifically. Because your Common App essay will be sent to everyone, and you probably wrote it, and then you rewrote it, and then your English teacher rewrote it, and then you gave it to your parents, and they rewrote it, and then you brought it to Education USA, and they threw their 2 cents in, and then you gave it to your friend who you think is smarter than you, and they helped you sort of rewrite it. By the time we get it, sometimes it's not what it used to be. Sometimes it gets just a little beaten into the ground, and it's generically pleasant, and every school you get it will see it and think, that is pleasant, but you drive some of the personality out of it. And I think the supplement is one spot where schools invite you to showcase your personality and showcase it in a way that will highlight your fit for that institution. So the first way we do this is through a question. Many of us will ask this: why college X? Why Tufts? Why Brown? Why Duke? Why Boston College? Why any of these places? And these are some examples of why Tufts, at least the first couple, that were particularly strong. So take the second one. Tufts speaks to me. It has everything I'm looking for: internationalism, compassion, strong intellectual challenge, and uninhibited joy. It is the only school on my Twitter feed, the only one that unfailingly makes me smile, the only one that makes me feel like home. That's an answer that is specific to Tufts. So I know that this is a student who did their research, either came to campus, utilized the website, spoke to current students, whatever the situation might be. But it also tells me something about the student. And that's something different than the answer, the fourth answer. My interest in Tufts was sparked when I saw a sculpture of a poem in binary in the library. These two students have different personalities, right? One of them is excited about compassion and internationalism. The other one's excited about art and math. One is not better than the other, but each of these answers tells us something about Tufts and tells us something about them. And that, I think, is the core to writing a good answer to these kinds of questions. The last one is a student who fell a little short. The idea of spending 4 years on a beautiful campus right outside of Boston excites me. That might be true. We are a beautiful campus right outside of Boston, but so is Brandeis, so is Bentley, so is Babson, so is Wellesley. Arguably, Wellesley is significantly more beautiful than we are. So think about being specific in these answers. Make sure they're not something that could be true for any school on your list or any school in the area, because we'll be paying attention to that. It's the first thing we read. The other place to really showcase your personality is in the other questions on the supplement. So we ask 2 more questions. The first one is always let your life speak. That is an outward-looking question. That is us being interested in the forces that have shaped you. What is it about your community, your school, your culture that has made you the way you are? The question is, why are you the way you are? So think about the various forces that contributed to your personality. And sometimes it's something big, sometimes it's something small. Take a look around when you get to, think about where you go to sort of relax and you find yourself constantly being drawn to one quiet corner. And then you look out and realize that you live in Lahore and it is loud and chaotic, and maybe the fact that you're drawn to quiet places has something to do that you were raised in a city that's a little nuts. So that would be an answer to that question, sort of why you are the way you are. The second one gives you a choice, and again, we are asking you to showcase your personality in a way that it's a good fit for us. So we ask questions like, what makes you happy? Celebrate your nerdy side. And use these questions to read into the personalities of the institutions you're applying to. Use these questions to figure out if you're a fit. Because if we're asking questions like, what makes you happy and celebrate your nerdy side, and you think to yourself, well, that's stupid. Those aren't good. Why do I care? Maybe Tufts, with its sort of like lighthearted personality, isn't a good place for you. And if you see the supplement, I think it's maybe Cornell asks you if there was a moment in history that you could be present for, what would it be? And if you read a question like that and you think, that sounds dry, maybe that institution isn't a good fit for you. So use these questions to read into the personalities of the places. I think if you're a good fit for the institution, and you will be a good fit for lots of places. If you're a good fit, it will feel like you can authentically represent an honest portion of your personality by answering one of these questions. And I just recommend that you do this in your own voice. You do not need to masquerade like a 70-year-old British professor to convince us that you're smart. You should sound like you're 17. You should have the energy, enthusiasm, stoicism, whatever personality you are should be represented in those essays. And that's a big part of our review process. So that's where we normally go to assess voice and sort of personality, personal qualities. The last one I'm going to touch upon, and I'm just going to touch upon it very briefly, is institutional priorities. Because at any highly selective school, really at any school in general, this is part of the conversation. These are things that you cannot control. I tell you about them because I promise to tell you about the process in an honest way. There's nothing you can do about it, but you should know that they exist. So these are things like there are 6 tenured professors in the Russian department, but only 5 majors in the senior class. So maybe we're looking for Russian majors. The orchestra needs strings. Now, if you play a string instrument, we'll be on the lookout. Colleges who expanded certain areas of their curriculum, colleges who have built new buildings. When you see on the website that a school is showcasing its new drama center, perhaps that is a good year to be a drama major in their applicant pool. Maybe that's something they're looking to grow. The upshot is you cannot cater yourself to these needs. There is nothing you can do to sort of make yourself fit these molds. Just be yourself, and if they come into play, they come into play. If they don't, they don't. The other institutional priority that comes into play is how each school weighs these different types of merit. So I would argue for any school, academic achievement will come first. But what matters to each school depends on who they are. So I mentioned already, I think for Tufts, the personal qualities, the voice, is a huge part of our review process. It is something we have a lot of conversations about. If you fill out the application for a place like MIT, they ask a lot of questions about your extracurricular activities. What Olympiads have you done? What research have you done? What robotics competitions have you competed in? So it's safe to imply that as they're looking at their applicants, perhaps the extracurricular engagement is a really important part of their process. So the way each school utilizes these four types of merit can vary, but I think in general, we're all looking at the same sort of categories and how they collide. Because the question is, how do these pieces come together to create a single decision? And does one element carry more weight? So I think there's often a perception that academics are the most important factor, sometimes the only factor. And I'm here to tell you that I think the reality of the process is that you need enough academics that we know you can do the work. But then after that, the decision is made based on other factors. So in our process, we're very much looking at how data and voice come together. This is very Tufts specific now. So data is are the quantifiable pieces of your academics. We need enough data to know that you can do the work. But last year, 80% of the students who applied could do the work. We took 17%. So the other piece we're looking at very heavily in our process is voice, is sort of the personal quality piece. And the way it breaks down is that we need to love you this much to take you. The data can only get you to here. So this is a student who has a 2400 on the SAT, is valedictorian of their class, has straight A's on all of their national exam results, absolutely is the smartest kid you've ever met by the numbers. They need enough voice to get them from here to here. Students who are a little lower need enough voice to get them from there to there. Even a student who's significantly academically lower, but who we still know can do the work, we might admit that they need more voice to get them to here. We have to love them sort of that much more. At the same time, we'll pass on this student if they're academically perfect, but they have done that at the expense of their soul. If you know anyone who's gotten straight A's and in doing so has become boring or has died a little inside, we don't admit those students. In our process, you could have the most glamorous numbers in the world, and we would pass on you if you don't have the enthusiasm and the engagement and sort of the tuftiness that we like in our applicants. So that's why voice is a big part of what we do. To break this down a bit into numbers. Last year we had 19,074 applicants. We admitted 17%. We were looking to enroll a class of 1351. And this is where Tufts applicants fall in the context of other schools. So what you're looking at is a group of highly selective schools, the percentage of their applicants, or the percentage of their admitted class that fell in the top 10% of their high school, and then the middle 50% SAT range on the two-part SAT. We use all three, but different organizations only report out two parts. And I show you this to prove a point. And the upshot is that by the numbers, the students applying to the highly selective schools in the United States are identical. Like, tell me the difference between the kids we admitted and the students Penn admitted, and the students Duke admitted, and the students Georgetown admitted. They're exactly the same. But we didn't all take the same ones. But we're working within this cohort of highly accomplished students. So how does the process sort of break down? I talked a bit about sort of that data. Data can only get you to here. It can get you to these different levels. That's essentially what this slide points out, that each academic record is evaluated on a scale. So there are students who are outstanding, who are stronger than our average admit, who really are, which is tough because our average admit is quite strong. But these kids really are top of the top. Then there's a group that is qualified. They look like the other students we admit. They are sort of exactly the same as everybody else, nothing too exciting. There are students who are less competitive, who don't have the same shiny scores and grades as everybody else, but they still have enough academic ability we know they could do the work. And then there's a category of students who are below average, who we genuinely think might not be able to sort of hack it. The way the decisions get made, and this is actually a little hard for all of you to see, I'm guessing, but this is a Naviance chart. If your school doesn't have this, what you're looking at is applicants to a university. This isn't a Tufts grid. We stole this from someone else. But you're looking at applicants to a university from a single high school charted based on GPA and SAT scores. So the north-south is GPA. It's on a 4.0. The east-west axis is SAT on a 1600 scale. The green squares are admits plotted on their GPA versus their SAT scores. The red X's are denies. The blue, I think they're diamonds, are waitlist. So you can see that in the outstanding category, your odds of being admitted are higher. Your less competitive group odds of being admitted are lower, but there are still mixed decisions in every group. The applicant pool for us last year, the outstanding group was about 13%, the qualified group was 60% of our pool, the less competitive group was 19%, and below average was only about 8%. So 73 were qualified to outstanding. Significantly more were even within the range of admissibility. But again, decisions are being made on how the data and voice go together and sort of that constellation of things. The one thing I want to introduce to the conversation, just very briefly before we wrap up, is early decision. Early decision is a binding admissions plan. It means that you have decided that there is one school in the US that you would like to attend more than any other school, and you're saying, if you admit me, I will go. If you are admitted, you have to withdraw all of your other applications. So it's not something to be taken lightly. The deadlines are typically earlier. We are on the brink of them right now if they haven't passed already. Our deadline is November 1st for early decision 1. Some schools like Tufts have early decision 2, which is a second round of early decision. Same rules, same binding commitment, but you don't have to have everything submitted until January. The advantages to early decision, essentially, when we're going through our applicant pool, I just showed you the numbers that showed about 80% of the students who applied were academically qualified. After we do a complete review of essays and extracurriculars recommendations, we recommended to admit about 39% of the students who applied last year. We only took 17%. So the benefit of early decision is that if you are someone who would be in that 39%, if you are someone who academically is competitive, personally compelling, we're excited about you, if you're in that 39% and it's early decision, your chances of being admitted are pretty strong. Not everyone in that group will be admitted, but your odds are pretty good because you're the kind of student that we would admit in regular, but there you are, ready to commit to us, so why wouldn't we take you in early? As we move into regular decision, that's when that 39% gets squeezed down to the 17%. That's when we have students who we absolutely could take. They're academically competitive, personally compelling, we're excited about them, and there just isn't room in the class. So that's the advantage to early decision. There are disadvantages as well, especially for you guys who in all likelihood are not going to be able to visit campuses. You're committing to a school you've never seen before, which is a really big commitment. You are missing out on the opportunity to compare financial aid packages. If you apply early decision, you are admitted and you will attend. You don't have the opportunity to see, did you get merit scholarship from somewhere else, even though the school you applied early only has need-based aid. So sort of all of those pieces are coming together there. If you apply early decision 2, you have to submit all of your other applications. So you have to do all of that work. One of the advantages of ED1 is that you can apply, and if you're admitted, there's a chance you won't have to finish your applications to other schools, which is just a weight off your shoulders. But the downside of ED2 is that you do have to complete all of those other apps. So that's sort of how ED factors into this. Before we take questions, I just wanted to touch very briefly upon financial aid. So we talked about sort of the competitiveness of this, that 80% are academically qualified, 39% are kids that we would admit, 17% are the percentage that we admit, barring the very small handful of need-blind schools for international students. The need for financial aid will take that 17% admit rate down to a significantly lower number. It is essentially one more hurdle to cross. So there will be students who are academically competitive, personally compelling, great essays, great recommendations, great personality, they're excited about Tufts, but then we have too many of them with not enough funding. So we will admit students every year on financial aid. We enroll a fantastic group of international scholarship students every year. We do something called meeting 100% of demonstrated need, which means we will provide what your family needs to send you to Tufts for 4 years, but it just makes the process more competitive. That's the reality of it. There's not much you can do about that. There are students sometimes who will say, okay, well then I won't apply for aid because it'll help me get in. Well, perhaps, but then how do you attend? You can't go unless you have the financial resources to support you. So I think the best option is to be outright from the start, be honest about your family's financial situation, and let the decisions come as they will. So that hopefully if you are admitted to a US school, they're able to fund you in a way that makes attending that school accessible. The only last word I'll offer before we do questions, so start typing in questions if you have them in the chat box, is that I will caution everyone in your area that there's a lot of emphasis placed on integrity in the application process in the United States. And there have been problems around the world and in Pakistan in particular with students, schools, teachers, whoever it might be, misrepresenting a student's background and their abilities and their grades or their essays, whatever it might be. I would caution you to be diligent about that. I would say make sure that your application is an honest and authentic representation of you, and know that you are good enough. Know that what you've done and the quality of your mind and the quality of your thoughts and the quality of your worldview is worth admitting. You know, we are looking for honest and authentic 17-year-olds. They're not perfect. They're not superstars. They haven't cured cancer. You don't need to do any of that to be admitted. So be cautious if anyone in your world is presenting you an opportunity to be in any way dishonest in this process, because the result will be immediate denial to institutions. And I think you're better off standing on your own 2 feet and doing the best you can with that. So with that, I'll stop. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them or field them, but whatever's most useful to you guys at this point.
Megan, if they have any questions, they can type them in the chat box, but I have a couple of questions. First of all, I wanted to thank you. This was amazing. I am sure I can speak for the students as well, but from my end, it was so educational. I mean, it was so informative. I've been an Education USA advisor for 3 years now, but this is brilliant. So thank you for that. I have a couple of questions now specific to international students. The first one is, do you have scholarships that students can apply for, or are they just awarded to students when they apply?
Sure. So essentially, when you're looking at U.S. schools, aid is going to fall into 2 categories. There's going to be merit-based aid and need-based aid. Just students, for your background, merit-based aid is given according to a specific skill or talent that you have. It can go to students who need financial aid. It can go to students who don't need financial aid. It can be enough to cover what you need. It can be not enough to cover what you need. But there are lots of schools that offer merit-based scholarships, and typically those are things that you have to apply to specifically. They might require extra essays or a music sample or a video of you playing, I don't know, basketball, whatever it might be, in order to be considered for those scholarships. So those are all going to be very school specific. Tufts only offers need-based aid, and our policy is to guarantee to meet 100% of demonstrated need. So for us, and I would argue for most other schools for whom that is the case, all you have to do to be considered for that is to submit the required paperwork. So we ask for the CSS profile. It's a form online through the College Board that will ask lots of questions about your family's background and circumstances. That form does have a cost associated with it, as illogical as that might seem. So if that cost is prohibitive to you and your families, there's a form online, a PDF, a paper-based form called the International Student Financial Aid Application. You can download it from our website or from the College Board's website, and you can submit that by hand and submit it to our financial aid office. That is what we will use to figure out what kind of financial aid you qualify for, and then the admissions decision is made in light of that level of need. And if you're admitted, you get 100% of what you needed. So the only extra step is to make sure you file the paperwork and you file it by the deadline.
Now, while we're on financial aid, we have a lot of students who have parents who don't have so much money in their bank accounts, but they have a lot of money in assets. And I know that there are lots of students out there who try to cheat the system by, by applying for need-based aid by saying, hey, look, we don't have a lot of money in our bank, but they do in assets. So how do you know that international students, I understand we try to get our students to be as honest as they can, but how do you know from an international student's point of view whether or not they are actually needy?
Sure. So to an extent, a lot of this is on an honor system. Okay. Students are signing forms when they submit their information that everything is truthful and accurate. If that is ever found to not be the case, Applications can be denied. If a student is on campus, and that has found to be the case, students can be dismissed from the institution.
Right.
So a lot of it is based on just taking students at their word. We use the information available to us. So if we are, you know, if we're looking at a student who seems to be qualifying for a full scholarship, but we're hearing from the teachers that the mom is the one hosting dinner parties and that, they've hired someone to help with the process, we'll start asking questions about the validity of that information. But truthfully, if you are trying to sort of game the system, you are much better off listing those assets because your chances of being admitted will go up significantly if you do not need significant financial aid.
Right.
If we have a student who, all things being equal, one of them needs $40,000 a year, one of them needs $10,000 a year, the student who needs 10 is more likely to get in, bare minimum. So I think if you want to give yourself every advantage in the process, represent your finances honestly. Don't overestimate because, again, then you could be admitted and not be able to attend. But if there are resources available, it is one fewer hurdle to cross. So I
Got
would
it.
recommend doing that. And I saw a question pop up about, are you giving full scholarship or half scholarship? That depends on what a family needs. So there are students on our campus who do not pay anything to be here. Students from abroad who we pay for their plane ticket, we pay for their food and housing and books and laptop and everything. There are students who are here contributing $20,000 and we cover the rest. There are students who are here contributing $55,000 a year and we contribute $5,000 a year. So the level of scholarship is entirely dependent on a student's individual purposes or a student's individual assets and available resources. I will say, as we were sort of just discussing, as the level of need increases, so does the level of competitiveness. So it is marginally easier for a student who has some contribution to be admitted than a student who we know is going to cost us more than $250,000 over 4 years to educate, which is an investment we make in quite a few students every year. But it makes the process more challenging that we've got to say in committee, this kid is worth that much money, because if your family's not paying it, we are. So we're really looking at someone who's going to be contributing in pretty serious ways at that point.
Thank you. And the last question I had was, we've been filling out the common application, and a lot of students say, we don't have anything, we don't have things like class rank and GPA in our school system because most of the students that we work with are in their A levels. How do you verify exactly where the student stands within his school and within the region?
Sure. Sometimes if a school doesn't rank, we don't know. And rank matters in so much as we have access to that information. So for some students, we know exactly where they fall. For other students, we use the information the school provides to give us a sense of how well they're performing compared to their peers. So we'll schools will send something called a school profile. Someone in your school's either counseling office or a head teacher or a principal or whoever it might be will submit more information to give us a sense of how grading is done, because there are some schools where everyone gets A's. There are some schools where the smartest kid in the class is getting a C. And it's our job to sort of figure out what's happening in each individual school, figure out sort of what's normal in a school, and find the group of students within that context who are performing to such a level that we know they're prepared for Tufts. The benefit of kids who are on the A levels is that we'll also have sort of your exams from 2 years ago, the O levels, the IGCSEs, or whichever variation of that system you're working with. And those are sort of standardized. So we know how many students in which exams, what percentage are getting A star, we know how many are getting A's, we know how many are getting B's, and we can sort of make our judgments based on that. So there is some benefit, I think, to having that external marker as well. Because sometimes we see students from schools that we've never seen students from before, and they're getting C's in school, and everyone in the letters of recommendation is talking about how they're the smartest kid in the world, but they're getting C's. And at that point, if we see that they're getting C's, but they're getting straight A stars in their sort of comprehensive exams, we know that it's a school where everyone's getting C's, and this truly is the best kid in school. So we'll use all the evidence available to figure out the academic information.
And I'm so sorry to be eating up your time, but I have a
No, it is
one
all
last
yours.
question. So I know, at least from a couple of years ago, I read that Tufts is one of those schools that says, take the ACT with the writing option and you don't need to take any SAT subject tests. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Does it still help to take the ACT with the writing option and do a couple of SAT subjects? I mean, does that strengthen your application?
Not particularly, no. What we ask for is either the SAT with 2 subject tests or the ACT with writing. When we're coming up with our academic evaluation, we will only use one of those. So if you've taken them and you've done well, you can send them. It'll be one more bit of evidence of how bright you are, but it's really not to your advantage. And those are expensive exams and time-consuming exams. Yeah. I think if you were taking all of them because you weren't sure which one you would do better on, that's fine. But if you know you are more comfortable with either the ACT or the SAT, do whichever one is comfortable to you and stick with that.
Okay, so even if you take the ACT with the writing option and say you do, a SAT subject test in physics and math level 2 because you want to be an engineering major, you're saying it's not going to particularly help the student at all?
Yeah, I would say if a student is comfortable with their science and math subsections on the ACT,
right,
just stop there. If they've already spent the money, they've already taken all those exams and they've done well, you can send them to us and we'll have that information, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to do something like that, to sort of cobble together a different combination of testing.
Perfect. I don't know if anyone else has any last questions to ask, but thank you so very much. I'm going to make sure that I send the recorded webinar to our colleagues within the region. So thank you so very much to take out an hour out of your morning, and it was very helpful.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if there are questions afterwards, my email address is there. Students, any of you are welcome to get in touch with me, have your friends get in touch with me. Any questions you have about the process, I'm here to help you through, so don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Megan. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.